This is a short video on the function of the hamstring muscles in gait. If we look at the classic anatomical model of the hamstring, we have a muscle that would extend the hip, flex the knee, and cause internal and external rotation at the knee joint. Eccentrically, that would mean the muscle is working with hip flexion to then cause hip extension, knee extension to cause knee flexion, and internal and external rotation. However, when we look at the function of this muscle in gait, we start to get a very different picture. So if we look at the hamstring in the sagittal plane, as the leg ends flight phase, we come into this hip position. The hamstring is working eccentrically at the hip and the knee to decelerate that leg in terminal swing. The foot then touches the ground. The tibia starts to go through extension, or the proximal part of the tibia becomes forwards. This creates ankle dorsiflexion and knee flexion. So we've got hamstring that is slowing down the tibia, therefore decelerating ankle dorsiflexion. It's also decelerating anterior translation of the tibia and slight knee flexion. Now, that anterior translation will cause an eccentric component, but the flexion in theory is narrowing the joint or narrowing the angle of the joint, so therefore may potentially be shortening the hamstring. So this may result as an isometric function or more towards an eccentric function. Depends on how you walk, but the hamstrings are going to be working to decelerate that moment at the knee and ankle. Also, as we step, the mass of our upper body is pushing us forward, so our hamstrings are decelerating that motion at the pelvis, which results in a deceleration of hip flexion and pelvis anterior rotation. Okay, then if we go on to the function in the transverse plane, as we land on that front foot, the calcaneus will go through eversion. That will cause a transverse plane motion of internal rotation at the tibia and internal rotation at the femur, giving us relative internal rotation at the knee joint. So the function of the hamstring here, especially the lateral hamstring, which wraps around the lateral aspect towards the anterior of the fibular head, is going to work to decelerate that internal rotation of the tibia, but also to decelerate the internal rotation at the hip. As the femur is internally rotating faster than the pelvis, that will create an eccentric lengthening more in the proximal part of the hamstring. If we then look frontal plane, we will get an abduction at the tibia and an abduction at the knee. That's going to cause an eccentric load to that medial hamstring, and will also cause an adduction moment and an eccentric loading at the hip in the hamstring region. The hamstring will also function at this point to control the pelvis in the frontal plane and the transverse plane. The main function of this eccentric process is to decelerate the flexional pronation motion moments through the lower limb, so then we can provide elastic energy to load the hamstrings and the lower limb to then propel us through stance phase.